Welcome to Shall We Consider? Today we are going to consider Sasquatch, also known as Bigfoot. Today we have a special guest, Philip Polk Palmer, a man of many talents, and he's going to share with us today some of his stories and knowledge of this furry behemoth. Philip, it's an honor and a pleasure to have you on our show today. Welcome.
Hey, thanks, Dave. It's an honor to be here. I was so glad to find out that you had gotten this thing going. I guess it was last year because I remember you talking about it. And it's always good to see something fresh come up in the world of podcasts. And the fact that you kind of have a broad range of what it is you like to address, I think it's great because you're not hemming yourself in. If you want to, that's fine. There's plenty of people who have a really straight focus, but it is nice to be able to branch out and do something different once in a while.
Thank you very much.
So far, you've done a great job.
All right. Well, Philip, why don't you tell a little bit about yourself and then how you got kind of interested in this particular creature?
Yeah, well, it's that's pretty. It's easy for me to be able to recount that because of specific things that happened, and I can't remember the year, but it would have been early 70s, early to mid 70s. There was a movie that I went to the movie theater to see with my father, mother, my twin brother, and it was called The Great Waldo Pepper.
Okay.
And it had Robert Redford. He was some kind of air pilot fighter guy that didn't get his chance at the glory. Or I don't know. It's been so long.
I do remember that film, yes.
So back then, as you probably recall, people younger than us definitely would not, that we didn't just get a half hour of these incredibly huge trailers. We didn't even call them trailers. We just called them previews. We got cartoons as well. And if you recall, Mr. Magoo.
Yep.
And we'd get little movie shorts. And so there was about a 15 or 20-minute movie short about Bigfoot before this movie started rolling.
Oh, okay.
And I was just gripped immediately. I might have been, I don't know, maybe 9 years old. I used to recount as thinking it was 7, but I think this was past 73, 74. I don't know. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But I know that they had some recordings of sounds. I don't recall if they had the Sierra sounds in it because the Sierra sounds first started getting recorded in 72, I believe. I doubt any of those were in these, but it did have, I remember, some howls. Something that one of them that was really reminiscent of the one that they call the Ohio howl.
Oh, yes.
It was gripping. I mean, I was kind of terrified because I was young, but I was also just immediately intrigued. And of course, I remember somewhat in this little short documentary, there was a focus on the Northwest, on Northern California, Oregon, Washington, maybe on up into British Columbia. But I remember thinking, because they were talking about mountains, and all I remember thinking is, well, I was old enough to know that I had not been to the mountains in Georgia, but I was like, we have mountains in Georgia. I'll bet they could be here. And so not long after that, a couple of years down the road, I think my parents were divorced at this point, but all Dad's books stayed at the house, and he had this huge library in the living room, and I used to just love sitting and just poking through all his books, and there were books on art, books on music, books on history and science. It was just like everything on there, but there was a little section of his that had books on aliens and books on Bigfoot. And the book, he actually it was one book, and it was actually just called Bigfoot. And that book is now disintegrated because once I rediscovered it, I started pouring through it again.
Probably.
So it was Al Berry, the one who was the journalist who was invited to go up to the Sierra Nevada. And his whole goal was to debunk these guys. He knew
Sure.
for certain there had to be trickery going on. So it was Al Berry, and there was a woman author that who co-authored it, and because she just features more in the back as her writing, so it's not talking about her like in the book it talks about Al. That's why I remember his name more. And he's since passed too. Once I discovered that, I was like, "There's got to be something going on here." But what happened was, from that point, I mean, I was very intrigued with all paranormal stuff as a kid.
Sure.
My parents bought me books with paranormal. They bought me things that I think that other parents of children similar age, they'd be like, "That is a no-no," you know. um, but as I became a teenager, I got into hanging out with the group, the friends, going out, and all that kind of stuff fell away for a while. All of my earlier interest in all those subjects, and um, but it got rekindled in my mid-20s.
Okay.
And I did start realizing by then, not by other anecdotes, because Steve, as you know, in '95 the internet was out, but it was still fairly well in its infancy. So
Yes.
um, it was just by that point of getting back interested in it, it just came back to me, and I went on a camping trip with some friends, and there were some things that occurred that may or may not have been something, but one of them was a sound too, a howl, or no, not I can't call it a howl. It was a cry.
Oh,
Later,
wouldn't a whoop?
it wasn't a whoop, and you know what? To
Okay.
this day, I have never heard a whoop, and it's funny because it's apparently one of the most commonly heard sounds. That's something they just do, like wood knocks. It's like whoop whoop.
Oh, wouldn't. Just
Yeah,
for the audience, I'm going to bring up the Sierra sounds just briefly.
yeah.
And that's just kind of a little brief,
That's
an idea of that. Yeah.
that's definitely what I would call a whoop.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and
That's a famous, recording. That's a part of, big part of, Bigfoot, no, Bigfoot world, I should say.
To me, that evidence is on par with the Patterson Gimlin film because, and I've said this a million times, but we are a species that are out of our five senses for most of us, other than people with serious impairments, our dominant means of measuring and gauging the world is our eyesight. And so it's so much a part of how we connect with the outer world. We even use that metaphorically, like we say "I see" to mean I understand.
Right.
So we put so much focus on just that as one of the senses that people are like pics or it didn't happen, that kind of thing. But everything is vibration, and you have these recordings that uh, they've been through. They've been through every kind of examination. Back in the mid '70s, they were sent to a sound lab. A Dr. R. Lynn Curlin, can't remember which university they were sent to, but he was the first one to analyze these sounds, and he went on public record as saying these sounds are completely organic from source to mic. There doesn't appear to be anything in between the source to the mic. There's no evidence of tampering with the tape speeds, and from everything this person could tell, this was some type of likely a primate being, but not necessarily, but definitely represented a species that is unrecognized because the sounds simply did not match anything that we have in the record.
Right. I've seen a analysis of those as compared to like wolves and things like that, and they do the whole thing where you see the spectrum of the different frequencies, and they say it's not any animal that they
Well,
normally heard.
yes, it's not. It doesn't match other species, and as far as humans go, it goes well below our vocal register and
Right.
well above. But the most
That's right.
incredible thing about it is a lot of these recordings are demonstrating 5 different tones going on at one time. like the vocals are creating a chord. You know,
Right.
it's incredible.
Right, and they also just the lung capacity, the volume to project it, they say is incredible.
That's right. That's right. There are a few recordings I've heard that I could hear where somebody might say that's a wolf, except for when you compare them against any known wolf recording,
Right.
just the volume is orders of magnitude higher.
Exactly.
They are, and the whole situation with them being up there in that hunting, there was a place where they'd go to hunt. I'm sure you probably caught up on that part about it. And there had been people, a group of men hunting since the late 50s, I believe, up there.
Oh, yes.
But Ron Moorhead started going up there around the early 70s. And I still not clear as to whether things were going on before that. I can't imagine that they weren't, but there's not a record of that. It's like once Ron Moorhead came aboard, there was a serious interest. I mean, these people were when it first started happening, I think in that year 72, when it first started coming on that season, they were utterly terrified. So maybe whatever may have happened in previous years wasn't as ramped up. It could have been just a series of occasional sounds like tree knocks that most people will either ignore, not pay attention to, or go, oh, what was that? I don't know. No big deal. It's amazing when you start paying attention to this stuff and you go, there's so many things that go on in the woods.
Exactly.
That I've experienced that normally you're just like, you wouldn't think twice about it. But then if you sat and thought about it, like, wait a minute, that's not a sound that a deer could produce and I think it happens a lot more than people realize. So maybe it wasn't as ramped up. And then once Ron got in there, I don't know, but that's when he rigged up a very early tape recording that was tripped by somehow, and those sounds are just. But the stuff that would go on, like, have you listened to what they call the argument?
Yeah. There's the kind of
It's very at first you don't realize.
a language, I should say.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely language. So so it seems to me like what they may have been able to do so far is that these things normally talk super fast. It's like it's a chatter, but it is so fast.
I see.
But in certain points when they seem to be trying to communicate with the hunters, it was slowed down. And that's what they call the samurai chatter. And
okay.
That's the most perfectly, like when you hear that stuff, it's funny because I was listening to some of it this morning just to kind of brush up on the sounds before the show. And I'm like, I don't remember I think it was a Reddit. And to watch the people like, this is ridiculous. You can tell it's people because they're copying what they're doing and it sounds just like that. I'm like, no. The humans are trying to mimic what they're doing, and it sounds ridiculous compared to the sounds they're trying to.
Right. Yeah, it's hard for the human to actually copy or imitate some. They may be able to imitate the sounds, but the actual, like we talked about before,
to get with the depth, the frequency, the depth.
Yeah.
The ones that they describe as samurai chatter. That is the perfect description. When you hear it, it sounds like, and it's the funny thing because not a linguist, obviously. When you hear just say the Japanese language compared to say some other of the Asian languages, Japanese, particularly in certain, it can be actually a much more guttural, bigger sound.
Yeah.
Sorry if that's politically incorrect.
Well, no, there's.
So that's why they dubbed it that, because it makes you think of like a samurai, like throwing out commands.
Yeah.
But the thing about the thing about it is it sounds like they're asking questions because there's an inflection where the last syllable goes up. And it's like there's a question going on there. And then you hear them trying to imitate it, and they sound as bad as I do. I mean, anybody who's listening to this, when you do, if you're interested, try to find this. Unfortunately, when you type in samurai chatter now, a lot of people
Yeah,
put up other parts of the recordings that are not the samurai chatter. It's more like the argumenter stuff. The argument is that really fast chatter,
right.
and Scott Nelson has been able to determine that that is a female and a male, they believe, arguing with each other.
Oh, okay.
They joke because they're like the female wins.
Well,
But
talking about okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
well, I'm just saying they you there's one of the voices clearly higher pitched
Hmm.
and has a certain way of expressing that's different. And the one that they're perceiving as the male has got a lower pitch, and you hear a lot of frustration in that one's voice, and they both sound angry. And
I see.
I think this may have been these recordings were captured after they'd left a tin of meat out for them. And yes, and you'd have to read. I don't think I've never heard much of this. You'd have to. The book tells it. Apparently, that argument may have been over whether or not to try the tin of meat.
Oh, yeah.
And anyway, they apparently did, and they didn't see him for it. May have been the rest of that trip. They're thinking the tin was bad, the meat was tainted,
Oh,
and so they didn't see him for the rest of that trip. And I can't remember how long periods they'd stay up there. They'd go up there, on horseback with mules. See, there's no driving cars up here. It's 8 miles
no,
up in is it
no,
Sierra
yeah.
Nevada?
That terrain is treacherous.
Yeah,
Speaking of females, there she is.
yeah,
Let me stop. There we go.
yeah.
So this is probably the most famous piece of the legend. I can tell you when I first saw it, as a kid, I definitely thought it was real. Um, I've watched it over the years, and I I have not until now, and we'll talk about Mr. Munn, but
Yeah.
Munn's. There's some intriguing things about this. Now, of course, there's Bill Hieronymus who claims that he was in
Oh, Bob.
pursuit.
Yeah.
Bob, excuse
Yeah.
me. Uh,
Yeah.
but this is certainly a female, and it just there's some things that we can go into
Absolutely.
about this.
Absolutely.
The first thing that strikes me is if this was a costume, it may be, but okay, I don't know how many other drawings or accounts or whatever before this is what 67.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you were going to do this as a hoax, it just seems weird that you would have a costume with breasts. I find that kind of odd. Like most of the encounters, the large majority of the encounters are males.
That's
So
correct.
you would think that maybe, that would be the first thing. I don't know why they would do that. So that's just the first thing that struck me. But of
No,
course, there's multiple
absolutely.
different things. Uh, and we can go into them.
Yeah. That frame right
Watching this.
there. Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Run it through and then go run through again. And then go back to that first frame you had it at because I can point something out there. I mean, look at that. If that's a suit back then, you know what a typical gorilla suit looks like even for Halloween now.
Absolutely.
Whatever's in that suit is filling it out. And you
Exactly.
can see the muscles. You can see the muscles in it.
Right. And I'll just briefly bring up since we're talking about uh, Mr. Yeah, here he is. Mr. Munns. He was he still is he's a Bigfoot researcher now, but he was did costumes and makeup. You can see he's working on an ape. Now, this is probably, in the 80s, but he was familiar with the work that was done in that particular time frame of 67. Of course, wasn't long after that they had Planet of the Apes. However, most of those apes were dressed. So,
That's right.
but anyway, what's interesting is, he's analyzed the film before. I can bring it back up, and he's analyzed it many times. But he
Yeah.
goes into a lot of things, not just about the muscle
Oh, body
ripples,
proportion, body ratios.
proportions. He's
Yeah.
done work as far as the angles, the camera angles, and the ratios. And
Yes.
is this creature actually? He estimated to be close to 7 feet. It does not appear this is a small individual. So the broad buttocks and everything, the long arms. But I will let you go into your analysis of this.
Well, yeah, we can start with a little bit about Bill Munns. Unfortunately, one of his the analysis, one of the best analysis he did was for a documentary that, believe it or not, unless I'm mistaken, guess who was behind the documentary? National Geographic.
Oh
But
yeah.
you cannot find it now. It's been yanked down. You cannot find that documentary online. And he got the original footage from um, Patterson's wife, from Bob
Oh,
Patterson's wife. She had the original film in a canister, kept it protected there. He got permission from her to borrow that, and then he loaded each frame into his computer, and he analyzed this thing frame by frame. Like you said, he did analysis on the body ratios, the ratio, say, of the upper arm length compared to the forearm length, the ratio of the arm length to the legs, the ratio of the upper leg to the lower leg. All of it is not human. Every bit of it is not a human proportion. So let me slip real quick for a minute over to another researcher who his specialty is it's just video editing, Photoshop, all that kind of stuff. He goes by Thinker Thunker. Have you ever listened to him?
yeah. I do know who you're talking about.
Okay,
Yes.
so Thinker Thunker did a great analysis of the body ratios as well. And Bob Hieronymus, the man who claims he was in the suit, what Thinker Thunker did is he brought up various images of people, including Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Bruce Lee, because they were in a movie together. The height difference is just amazing. But
Yeah.
no matter the height, when you break it down to the body ratios, they're almost always the same. So when you look at Bob Hieronymus doing his imitation of the walk,
Yeah.
now Bob Hieronymus does pull, he's one of those like old codgers who pull his pants up right below his rib cage, but
Yeah.
you can see that. If anything, that would help his case. But you know where the hips actually are. And so Thinker Thunker, what Thinker Thunker did was took Bob Hieronymus's clothing off of that still image from him walking and adjusted it for size and laid it on top of Patty,
Right.
and then had to stretch it. Then, because normally you're looking at Patty that you're thinking as a person, not you, but people think as a person in a suit. When they see Patty dressed in clothes with a shirt tucked into pants, then you see how freakish the proportions are. You see how short the legs are compared to the torso, how
Yes.
long the arm. It was a
Uh,
brilliant move on his part to do that.
there's so many things, and Dr. Meldrum has looked at too. The way the knee bends before
Yes.
take a step. That is not a human trait.
Okay.
They can't. Well, you can't do it really as a human.
So go back to that frame where the back leg is way up in the air, one of the trailing
Well,
legs.
let's see. You tell me when.
There you go.
Where?
It's almost at the beginning when she's in the left.
Okay. All right. Let's take
You
a look.
stop to keep. Don't know if it's forward or back or from there. It's going to be the leg is almost the lower leg's almost perpendicular, going backwards. There. Let's keep right. There we go. Perfect.
Okay.
Okay. Now look at that. One time, just for giggles, I pulled up on YouTube just videos of people walking. You can find anything you want right on the internet.
Sure.
So
Sure.
you've got like this street scene, could be downtown New York, and it's for some reason just filming people on the lower half walking. And our back trailing leg literally only bends like the teeniest bit. And then, of course, it gets straight.
Right.
Their legs never go totally straight. And look at
No,
that.
it doesn't.
That's almost a 90-degree angle. Now you could say,
It's,
well,
you,
they were,
you,
you could say that, well, here's the argument for people say, well, they faked that. But here's the thing. Back then, nobody had
no.
seen a Bigfoot walking. Nobody had said, oh, they walk like that. So there would be no precedent to even try to walk like that. Why would they even think, let's move the leg higher back? There would be no precedent for that.
Right, right, and it's also that that the way they walk is also dependent on their foot, which is we'll get into that with the
Yeah.
footprints, uh, with Dr. Meldrum, but
Absolutely. And what you, if you know, there were
yeah,
footcasts that did accompany this
that's right, that's right,
and photographs.
and I mean you can also just look at the neck,
Yes.
I mean that's a large muscle that's attached from the shoulders
There
all
is a
the way
neck, but
up.
the neck is covered in muscle, like you see with these extreme
Right.
bodybuilders.
It's just it's it's enormous.
Yeah.
The bottom line is that at that time, the suits that were made, and talks about this, it just doesn't match up. How tight it is that they could actually show the ripples of the muscles.
That's right.
Obviously,
And you see it
they're
flexing and contracting too. You see the
right, and
muscle.
you see the breasts, which again I find strange that they would have decided that they were going to have a creature with breasts.
Philip Morris to Philip Morris claimed the man who claimed he made that suit. He claimed that was his
Yeah.
idea. But when you look at what he presents, although it's definitely on a par above a normal gorilla suit, it's still miles away from this, and none of it accounts for the legs. They basically they beefed up the shoulders with football pads when they made this fake real suit. Like it's been pointed out, if that's a person in a suit, nobody has been able to find the original suit. Why would it not be saved somewhere? Or
Yeah,
or reproduce it. Why has nobody been able to reproduce this? You saw what the BBC did in 1999, right? They spent $1 million on a documentary to do this, and it's a joke. It's laughable. Well, I mean, the arm length is for one thing, but just the suit is this spindly thing with the legs are way too long, clearly way longer. The arms too short. It's laughable. Now, I think they spent $1 million on the documentary. I don't know what they put into the suit, but we're talking 1967 versus 1999, and $1 million to make the movie. Probably at least you'd argue a third of that to make the suit, and it's
right.
nothing.
The other thing that I had never really thought about till I watched some of William Munn's is the way the head fits into for it to have it doesn't a human head would not fit right in the costume to make it look like this.
You've got a forehead that goes back really
right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
So I mean, it's extremely compelling evidence. I have to say that I've never heard anybody completely debunk it. They may point to some different.
I've heard of people that say they try to, and they come out with the ad hominem attacks where instead of just being measured and scientific, they just come out with anger, and that's ridiculous.
Yeah, well,
that's clearly a man in a suit. Well, if it's clearly a man in a suit, then demonstrate it. Demonstrate it. Okay, nobody's done that.
Yeah, I guess I've seen so many, monster movies.
Yeah, me too.
Huge
fan of
gorillas and all sorts of stuff, and I never immediately thought that that's a guy in a gorilla or a woman in a gorilla. In fact, I didn't really know when the first time I saw it, I didn't know it was a female. I didn't.
Right.
I had no idea.
So to give you an idea of what they estimate her size. So like you said, I've the lowest estimates I've seen for height are 6'6". The highest estimates are anywhere from 7'6" to 8 feet. The weight estimates are minimum 800 pounds on well up over 1,000 pounds. And that is that the bulk of that thing, no matter how tall it is just incredible. And that's the female. So
Right,
they're
and
very
they're smaller than the males. Yeah.
very credible accounts of males being. It's almost frightening, but um, we I'd be remiss if I did not bring up one other person who spent a lot of time and research into this, and that's M.K. Davis, who's from
Okay.
Mississippi. He has spent so much time. Now, part of the reason why he doesn't quite get the credit, first of all, since he wasn't the first to really go to it, but because he has a pretty bizarre theory behind his analysis. But whether or not you believe his theory, it makes people angry. I'll be honest with you. His theory
Oh,
is
go ahead and share it. Yeah.
okay. M.K. Davis's theory is this is a very small portion of the story, and that what occurred here was a massacre, and that there were more Sasquatch. And he's got footage. See, there was more footage than this.
Yeah.
It was just footage that wasn't her. So it was just like them doing what you'd call like B-roll and stuff. Um, and but he points to some areas where he claims that's a pit that's been dug and there's clearly blood in the pit, all that stuff. I have
Wow.
no way of knowing.
Right.
He points to the dog's interest in some of these areas.
Mhm.
But all I can tell you is it's very polarizing. There are some people who think he's on the money, and then there's a lot of people who are very upset by what he claims happened. And it is kind of, he claims if he's analyzed to the point where if you look at these woods, there are certain points in the film where he claims, I think you can see evidence of something in the woods. But that's not the reason I bring him up. I say that's probably why he hasn't quite got his due, although people do know him pretty well in this field, is he has done a lot of close up analysis of Patty. I mean, very close up, detailed analysis. Um, and he finds some things that this is almost kind of moving into woo category. Not really woo, but towards these things being much more human than ape. And I have to say, I am not maybe 100% sold, but he makes some convincing arguments. He's done some really close up areas of every part of this body. Now, I keep pointing to it, knowing that y'all can't see my finger. I'm pointing at her on the screen, but he did analysis of what looks or appears to be on this side, possibly we these days we'd call it a rat tail, a small
Oh,
grape
okay.
that comes down, and what appears to be from this shoulder slinging down this way, a lanyard that would mean there might be something on the other side of her body. And it's definitely worthy of. I'll send you some of his stuff. I should have done that earlier, but
Okay. Well, that's
this,
fine.
we don't have this doesn't have to be the only time we get together on this or other subjects.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. We can
There's
certainly talk about it. Since you were talking about, is this more human than ape, or, uh, you know, gonna bring up the old Gigantopithecus. And what do you think of that theory that perhaps Sasquatch had descended from this particular ape?
uh, I don't dismiss it because I can't, and so I accept that it's possible. You do know that they've reconstructed a Gigantopithecus. They know it was clearly a very large primate.
Oh,
But
yeah, yeah, yeah.
but
This is
they've
just
reconstructed it from just
right.
portions of a jawbone, and they found a lot of teeth. So there's a lot of guesswork in what some people argue that was a quadruped only. Other people say it
Mhm.
was probably quadruped and biped. There's enough anecdotal evidence and even some footage of Sasquatch to suggest that it probably normally travels as a biped, but can move
Yes,
very
yes.
quickly on all fours.
I've seen accounts that
Um,
they will immediately go to all fours if they want to truck on out. Yeah.
since these days now, I'm more in the camp of this thing being uh, close to. I know that the argument is well, chimpanzees we share almost 99% DNA. So when I say close, that other 1% is so important when it comes to. So we're talking about moving up into the other 1%. And
Right.
I think now I'm pretty sure that this I would call it a being, and it is more human. So if Gigantopithecus is a part of that, they had to have done some kind of development from what they think they were doing back when they around the
Well,
time
yeah,
they put
I would
10,000 years
say,
ago, I think,
mhm,
something
yeah,
like that.
that's what they range. And I would say looks more like a orangutan. you look at this, this is almost like sloth-like claws type thing, and then you see how short the legs are. So obviously, uh, this doesn't appear that Sasquatch descended from this creature, but it's an intriguing thing to
Yeah.
look at, to kind of think
Oh,
about.
absolutely.
Yeah.
It should at this point, obviously, it should be thrown out because until you have something that comes along and just immediately says, okay, now we can rule that out, you have to keep it in there. There is also the many types of the subspecies of Sasquatch theories. And a lot of people state that there are at least four main types. And one of them that people often nickname the Gugway, there's a photo from Canada. There's a I'm trying to remember what part of Canada, if this is Alberta, but I'm trying to think hard on that one. Anyway, this is up near some waterfalls called the Seven Chutes. And the story behind it is a man was just taking photographs. And this has got some years on it, like probably the early 90s. And it wasn't until much later, after really looking at the picture and seeing something that's too far off right now, but enough to make you have interest in it, that he zoomed in, and it appears to be a very patty-like body shape, but the muzzle looks very much, it's more pronounced, but it doesn't look like a bear. It looks more like a baboon.
Right.
It's got this very large, pronounced muzzle, and then the craziest thing is it appears to have something under its arm, and that thing could be a pig. It's kind of pink skin.
Hmm.
It could be a dog. It's something that you apparently at least see a couple legs and maybe a tail. Um, Yeah, you'll have detractors say, "Oh, that's just a trick of light and shadow." To me, it's too defined to dismiss it as that. But there's one Bigfoot type that they claim has that kind of more muzzle look. There's what in Florida they call this thing the skunk ape.
Right. The skunk ape. Yeah.
They are typically more, I guess, a lot of the descriptions, not all of them, but a lot of descriptions are of a lankier, which would make sense if you consider the climate.
Right.
If you're going by that whole Bergman's rule thing, and I don't know how hard and stone that is, but you look at a lot of animals like deer species and bear, and when you move up into the climates, they're way more robust.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes. And any my understanding is that the hot spots. I'll bring it up briefly here. Let me see. So here are some hot spots, but what we know is that obviously here is the biggest, but I mean this is an environment that's very conducive. It has a lot. I mean, people, well, a creature that big won't be able to sustain itself, and but it's an omnivore and it can adjust to whatever it needs to do. And my understanding is they move about quite a bit, so they don't just stay in one place. Uh,
well, there's a mix on that. Now,
mm,
some people were hardcore that they're nomadic. Some people will say no, they stay fixed. And to me, once again, it's kind of taken the middle road. It appears as though, like, the best way to gauge this is if you get into the stories of what are called habituation. So people that live in an area where they are having their backyard is part of their territory, and they start having repeated encounters. Sometimes those encounters can be not so nice. I think it's all how the human chooses to navigate this a lot of times. Um, but that's one of the best ways. I know that there's a guy that I recently listened to. He says there's about 3 weeks, only 3 weeks out of the year, where the males appear to leave and then come back. And he said that's during a season when the apples are growing in the orchards. He
right.
thinks they're going off and bulking up and bringing them back. Um, but yeah, there seems to be a mix on that. Definitely, there's some where I've noticed people say for in all of fall, they're gone. There's just no more sightings, no more wood knocks. They disappear for 3 months and come back. Um, there's an area that I go to up in North Carolina. Unfortunately, I have not been there since 22. due to a lot of reasons. Every time I've been up there, though, is in the fall. And every time I've been up there, there is activity then. But I haven't been there in the spring and I haven't been there in the deep of winter or summer. So
Now,
I'd like to get there at another time of year.
it's interesting though, the North Carolina, the sightings seem to be near the coast. That's interesting.
They're
So,
everywhere in that state.
yeah, I was going to say in South Carolina, I think maybe they're just putting the number there. That doesn't mean it's necessarily where they're actually sighted. Yeah, they would be up in here because that's where South Carolina,
There's a
their
recent
sightings are
sighting
usually up in there. Yeah.
about 2 years ago, and I'm guessing on the number, but it couldn't be more than 2 years ago. There was a sighting, a broad daylight, up close sighting on Hunting Island.
Oh, okay.
No, it wasn't Hunting Island. I'm sorry. It was what's the other one that was up until the 80s was just some local fishermen that lived there. It's right by Hilton Head.
Kiowa? Not Kiowa.
No. Gosh, I can't believe I'm drawing a blank. I used to go camp in the Defusky Island.
Defusky. Yeah, Defusky.
There was a up close sighting, and for anybody that says this gives it more of an air of credibility, I'm just throwing it out there. It was a doctor who saw it with his son or his son-in-law. They were in a golf cart, just crossing the path, and the reason I would say something like that might give it more credibility is if you are a practicing physician, and I don't know if he's retired or practicing, that would be something you might not want to do if you're still in the business, Oh, that's that kook. I'm not going to him anymore. Do you know one time I literally in a debate about something totally different than Sasquatch or even the paranormal? I was in a social media debate with somebody about something, and he decided he'd had enough of me. And you know what he said? He goes, "You're that guy that believes in Bigfoot, aren't you?" And I cracked up. So what I did was I took his words and I put them in quotes and I put his name at the bottom of it and made my post update for
That's
Facebook.
yeah.
And that kind of got his ire. So it's funny how something like that can be used as a dismissive. Anything you say can't have any merit.
Sure, it's the conspiracy theory.
Yeah,
which was actually another conspiracy theory. The CIA came up with that.
Came up with it after the Kennedy. I've heard that too. And the funny thing is, I will say this, and I could say this about a lot of information, and it will not go to that subject. When it comes to a lot of this political stuff, there's a lot of information that you could have pulled up 10, 12 years ago on Google. It would be at the top of the list.
Yeah.
And including that information you just brought up, good luck if you can find it at all. It's all getting scrubbed. Like, this is so much more sophisticated than burning books. Hey, we can just scrub it completely. So that's true with some of the Bigfoot stuff. Sometimes you can still find it, but it's hard. I sent you that video of the 3 frightening images that Bob Gimlin, not the Bob Gimlin of Patterson Film, but Bob Gimlin.
Bob Gimlin, he has
the
podcast.
And I was going to tell you that second one. Unfortunately, when I watched it, I even looked at it from the iPad screen. When I saw that footage, that second one, it's footage. It's not a still image. That is one of the most unbelievable captures of a face in the leaves I have ever seen, but it did not translate on that Bob Gimlin YouTube show.
Right.
I'm telling you, I'll get it for you if I can find it, but I know that's one that's much harder. That's much harder to find. The guy who took that, Dobson was his last name. He's been deceased for several years now. He was an interesting character too. Very interesting.
So, just for balance, I guess, what are some of the interesting hoaxes that you've come upon?
Rick Dyer.
Rick Dyer.
Rick Dyer is the most fascinating hoaxer to me of all because he has been able to pull off at least 3 different hoaxes and always managed to get a following. So while he might not be a character you'd want to go out and have a beer with, I admire him because I admire anybody that has that. that ability to con people, while also sometimes telling you Bigfoot is a pile of BS. So, are you familiar with the first story?
Yeah, why don't you give some examples of Rick
Okay, so
Dyer's.
my brother calls me up in 2008. And Ken, my brother, knew how interested I was in the subject. He was actually interested in it. But see, Ken, I was the brother out of the two of us that was the artist type, the musician. I was free to have that book on UFOs on the coffee table. Ken had chosen a life that he thought gave him too many like tight parameters he had to work within, like the picket fence and all that stuff. And he secretly loved all this information, but he had to talk to me and me only about it. Matter of fact, he would tell me, Philip, don't be talking to Phyllis, our aunt. Don't be talking to her about Bigfoot now. He's always trying to micromanage me. But he called me up in 2008. You got to get on, turn on the TV right now. They found a Bigfoot body in Georgia. And I was like, what? I mean, as much as I am into the subject, like this already just screams like, although I was like, well, I guess it's possible. So I didn't go on the TV and just went online. And sure enough, I found all these, the big, CBS and all that were covering it, all the main biggies. And as soon as I saw the images, I was really suspicious, but I still hadn't ruled it out because you just can't. When you're talking about something that's never been officially confirmed, you can't really say, well, that doesn't look like a Bigfoot, even if we've seen some images.
Right.
But there's a lot of great internet sleuths out there, and they immediately got online and started looking up Bigfoot masks. And they found one that was a perfect match. What he and I think the other guy, it was a police officer named Witten. Somebody Witten was his last name. They went in on this hoax. They bought a Bigfoot suit. They stuffed it with pig entrails and all kind of other stuff. And they put it in a giant, I think they put it like in a refrigerator or like a freezer box. And they filled it with water and froze it, so that you had parts of the body coming up, enough to see under the ice, kind of like the Minnesota Iceman, which that's a whole nother story. Right. I may or may not get in today. But they were obviously borrowing from that. And then they got a hold of the local news, and that thing spread like fire. Who's that big time hoaxer got a hold of it? Got an Italian last name. Anyway, he's a known hoaxer, and he will jump in on anything where he can make some money. Total grifter. And he jumped on it. He was because he's got this ability to publicize like him. That guy's a total hoaxer. He seems like a total adoring character, but if you were a professional musician, you'd want him in your camp because he's going to get somebody to come listen to your music. He had the ability to get interest in things. Tom Biscardi. So Tom Biscardi gets on it with him. They've got the news coming, and they keep saying they're gonna bring the body out. They're thawing it out. Da 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 da. He's doing the news reports. Look, he roped in these news. I don't know what the news stations really thought, but they knew that for a moment they had their goal, because as long as they're going to get viewers, right? Right. And so, it was quickly all fell apart within, I don't know, a very short period, several days at the most. It came crashing down. The police officer that was the guy that was on it with Rick, he lost his job, and obviously, and then you thought that was the end of it. But Rick Dyer continued to build a following. I don't know how he did it, but he did, and I would keep tabs on him because I was intrigued. And here's the other thing, and let me deviate real quick for a moment to prove a point. I'm going back to the Patterson film for a second. So for the people that say it's a hoax, and the reason they say it's a hoax is because if you look at Roger Patterson's history and you look at him as a human being, you look at his character, you look at his track record. He didn't return the camera when he was supposed to. I don't know if he ever paid his debt on the camera that he rented. He spent a lot of his life like as an out-of-work rancher or something like that. So it's a character assassination, which you really shouldn't do. You should just take the evidence. But I get going to that because it could have merit. But here's the thing: even if that were the case, let's say he was actively trying to hoax, you could never rule out the possibility that somebody who's trying to hoax actually happens, slim chance though it may be, to come across gold. And of course, even if he's a hoaxer, if he finds the real thing, of course he's going to drop everything else he was planning on doing and go for that. So my thought with Rick Dyer was, well, he's clearly a hoaxer, but he's also very interested in the subject. Although I seem to have heard him publicly denounce the reality of it, he seemed to be genuinely interested in it. So I kept tabs on him to see what he was hoaxing, or if maybe he might actually start getting seriously. There's another big name that I'm not going to name by name that I think is a mixed bag. I think you and I discussed him on the phone.
Yeah,
I'm not going to name him on not, but I don't want to do that. But I will readily call out Rick Dyer because everybody knows. So he pulls off another hoax. He manages to get another really ridiculous looking body cobbled together once again in ice, but this time he's able to get it on a tour bus and start touring malls like they did with Minnesota Iceman. Now, I don't know if he ever made how much money he made. When you look at this thing, it's the most ridiculous, goofy looking suit ever. Then that falls apart, and then yet a third time he supposedly gets word that somewhere outside of Houston, I believe it was, there's an interchange of freeways. And in between of these interchanges is about 100 yards, not 100 yards. Let's put it probably 30 acres of wooded land in between all these freeways. And there are a bunch of homeless people living there. And supposedly the homeless people claim there's a Sasquatch living in the woods with them. So he goes there, he starts interviewing these homeless people, and he supposedly starts putting up slabs of ribs on trees. So this one is a two-part hoax. It's kind of like a two hoax within one, because you get what's called the tent video. And it's like somebody's inside of a little, like 1 or 2 man tent, and you see this image walk by and even look down at it. It looks sort of like Patty, but it appears to have like a mustache, like a Tom Selleck kind of thing. Not a mustache and a beard, but just a big mustache.
Right, just a mustache, yeah.
And it had grabbed the slab of ribs off the tree. I thought it was intriguing, but I mean, it turned out it was just a whole video fakery thing, like complete video fakery. But at the same time, a guy was doing a documentary on Sasquatch, and more specifically on people who chase Sasquatch. And I never watched it. I can't think of the name right now. So he featured Rick Dyer on that. And in the portion of the movie about Rick Dyer, there's a close-up of this, the best he had done yet, with a Sasquatch image. I still don't know how it was put together. I think it was a suit, a mask, and makeup. And it's supposedly in that homeless encampment that they get some footage of it at night. And it's much more well done. It's still a hoax.
Doesn't give up, though, does he?
No, and he always would have a following. And when I say a following, I'm talking about a rabid group of people who would just... This was before the term cancel was even there. These people would cancel out anybody that dared question. They were like his pack of dogs defending him. It was religious. It's quite fascinating. So I don't know what's ever happened to Rick Dyer. There's a lot of other hoaxes out there. There's one that shows one that's kind of like walking down, like looks like there's a mountain slope and it's coming down a path.
Yeah, yeah.
But the arms are in my estimation, the arms are very human proportion. And it appears to almost look like it's got these alien-like ears coming off of its head. I mean, I don't mean they're like antenna. It's furry, but a lot of people buy into it. I look at it and it screams hoax. But to me, all the things that I've seen that, in other words, to me, there's a big divide. When I look at footage, and we're just talking about footage right now, it's almost immediate with most of it. That's ridiculous looking. Okay, I could almost do that well if I spent a little bit of time. And then there's the other footage that usually stands scrutiny. That's why I really would say get more into Thinker Thunker, because there's a particular here's the thing where you can take a blurry piece of footage from way in the distance and it still be excellent evidence. This is I think it's in British Columbia, and somebody's got a view of something that's clearly 150 yards, 200 yards away. And it's walking around and it appears to be like looking at things on the ground, but also it stops and looks up at a tree. But one of the most incredible things is it starts walking from, I always do this backwards, from like left to right.
Mm-hmm.
And as it's going in that direction, it suddenly steps down into a giant hole. And the thing about it is, you can see the trailing leg. You saw we looked at Patty's trailing foot.
Right.
Well, that's nothing. That's nothing. That's nothing. The leg winds up going up. It's like up above. It's like it's double back almost, because it's going down into the pit, and its back foot is still up on the ground.
Right.
And this is this guy, like I say, he's an expert in CG. It's not. It's definitely a real footage of the wild and something moving around. So in this case, you have, like with Patty, it's either a person in a suit or it's not, and it's still something biological and real. And Thinker Thunker videoed himself like going down off steps, and like just like if it's 3 or 4 steps, him just being on the high step and going all the way down to see if he could keep his back leg trailing like that. It's not even remotely possible. So even though that's blurry footage, it's incredible to see physically what this thing is doing. Another one I got to put on the list to send you.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of the evidence or some of the compelling briefly. And I don't know if you've run across this, but the tree structures.
I got tons of them myself. Yes.
Yeah. So let's talk about these.
Absolutely.
First appearance, people go, so what? There are these things that are crossed like that.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, theoretically, human beings could do it. Some of this looks like they could.
All right.
But
So
here these structures are, they would have to have cranes or something to move them around.
So here's the thing with this. You're right. There are plenty of them where you could just make the argument humans did it. But the fact is, like, see that shape? That's one of the first ones that I saw. Actually, I didn't discover it. My friend did. We were at a Bigfoot conference. I was invited to speak at a conference outside of Atlanta in 2019. And the first night or the first day, we met at Sweetwater Creek State Park, which is west of Atlanta.
Yes, I've been there.
So that was where we had our meet and greet under like a little roofed area with picnic tables and barbecue and all that stuff. So we were going to be clearing out of there. Tom Cantrell, the man who put this on, he put us all up in motel rooms. Like, he wasn't even there. He couldn't make it. He was going to come with Bob Gimlin, but couldn't make it. He's up in Washington State. So we were going to retreat to our motel rooms, but we stayed around till after dark. And this guy that I met that's from Tennessee, he said, "Come here, I got to show you something." Well, we pulled the car around on this little like cul-de-sac within the camping area and just park, and we just go walking in the woods 50 yards, and there's that design you're looking at right there. So what it is, it's like a spine. It's got one branch that's leaning up against the tree, and then you've got all these things interwoven along it. The thing about the one that he showed us that we found, I've got footage of it, I've got video footage and pictures of it. It's wedged between 2 trees. So picture this. Here's a tree growing up, and here's another tree. Now they're 15 feet apart. So they'd be much further apart. I'm just showing you. They're both growing out of the ground. This thing was the spine was perfectly, it wasn't leaning up against a tree. It was so tightly woven between these two that it wouldn't fall down. It had to be bent in one and around the other. And then all these spines, like you're seeing on this picture, were there. I was blown away by that. But the thing is, yes, humans could be doing some of these, but the thing is, for all these common shapes, you see teepees, you see this shape is very common. There's quite a number of them that are common that they do. You can find them on scales like you were just talking about that no human could do without machinery. Okay. There's one that Mark Abel, he's got a YouTube called Colorado Bigfoot. Just get a picture in your head of a 70-foot tree that's not rotten, that's been pulled out of the ground and woven between standing trees, threading the needle between like 4 standing trees. This is 11,000 feet up. There's no machinery anywhere.
What is the meaning of these structures? What is this a type of communication? Is this a type of
No,
monument or sacred?
I don't know. I don't. I will
Don't
tell you
know.
this. I will tell you this. Well, I don't think anybody knows. People are going to claim to know. I think there probably are some people who do know because there are some people who have there. I believe, and I usually hate to use that word believe because it's religious, but I believe in my heart of hearts. So if there's a few people that I've talked to that have had communications with these beings, and they do know about some of these things. But I will say this. Um, Once when I was up at it's right at the foot of the beginning of the Appalachian Trail, Amicalola Falls,
Yes.
and I've got a picture
There.
of it. You know those trees that the Native Americans made where they would force the tree to grow like it would take a
Yeah.
hook?
Yes.
Well, I've got one of those that's right off the trail, and it's not a tree that's 200 years old. It's not a sapling, but it's not some massive old tree. So somebody is still doing those, and I don't
Right.
think people are doing them. Um, so the thing is, there's some that are on a scale that you just can't argue that humans did them, and I do think the brunt of even the smaller ones are being done by them. Now, I'm sure by now because it's gotten popular enough, of course, there are going to be some copycats. As a matter of fact, I've made a couple myself in hopes of getting response from them, and I have had some success in that degree. Up in the area in North Carolina, I told you that I go to, it wasn't a tree structure; it was a flat, two-dimensional glyph I made on the ground with sticks, and something clearly altered it. And when I say that, believe me, I took into account whether it was the feet of a raccoon or a possum. That does
Didn't.
not, no, it does. It could not account for these. These alterations are too perfect, too meaningful, and there are no other humans up there. Once I go above my friend's cabin, that's just it. That's all there would be bear and raccoons and birds and all that. I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg with that place. But yeah, so I've gotten interaction. I've also gotten tree knock interaction on at least 3 occasions where I have gotten them to respond to my tree knocks, including a whole tree coming down one time. Uh, that was on that same property, and that got my attention.
So, when you feel when you say you're communicating with them or you know they're near, do you get a certain feeling? Do you is there like I've seen some descriptions where some people just become not necessarily overcome with fear, but they can just it's a heightened sense of something's out there. That's not it's not just you're listening to a bear or wolf or whatever. Do you have that kind of experience?
Well, I've had 2 situations where a fear factor came over me so gripping. It was
Mhm.
I was so inundated with fear that it was paralyzing. Now, that could just be in the moment my own imagination getting the better of me and causing that level of fear response. One time it was when Stacy and our dog Douglas got ahead of me on this trail up at Lake Conaswega or Sawaga. I don't know how you pronounce that lake. Looks like Sawaga. Um, and I just got this idea that they didn't need to get out of sight of me on the trail. And it really got to me. And so I made sure to get up to because I'd already found that was where I found my very first tree structure, a pyramid that was way up above the trail. And not only was there a pyramid structure, there was all this stuff that was pulled down and it wasn't in an organized fashion. It literally looked like it was put up there because this is like going immediately up way steep above the trail. It looked like somebody had made a blind so that they could sit behind that and just watch. Now, I do think they like people watching. We like,
yeah, yeah.
if we could see them, we like Sasquatch watching. We like looking at other animals, right? I think they do spend a certain part of their day keeping tabs on us, possibly for entertainment, and possibly because it is of utmost importance that they keep tabs on our comings and goings, because we're clearly their biggest pain in the butt for many reasons, including threat.
That
Or
explains a lot of why people don't see them very much, because they're always watching for
yes, yes,
the human intruders coming into their environment.
yeah. The other time was at nighttime when I was outside of a cabin, and like I said, that could have been my imagination. I was by myself outside of a fire in the dark, and I had this feeling of being watched, and I'd already had a lot of experience there. This place is where I had my first wood knock. I didn't try to get it. I was just on the back porch of this cabin, which overlooked a ravine that went down to a creek. It was about 3 a.m, and I just heard this huge, lonely, imagine the loudest baseball pop fly knocker you could ever hear, reverberating down that ravine. It was amazing. And I've been having other types of indications that there was something nearby. And so I think honestly that was just a natural. I was still new to this whole thing. That was in 14. New in terms of getting out in the field and really trying to
Right.
get out in the trees. I mean, I wasn't camping, I was in a cabin, but you don't have to be. Some of the most hair-raising stuff I've experienced has been in a cabin.
Well, yeah. And
I mean, I'm not trying to point them out to be monsters. I'm not doing that.
Well, no.
They could
But,
definitely,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, no, I was just gonna say, I just add this as a little one of my first introductions to Bigfoot was, of course,
A
this.
giant, hairy creature, part ape, part man. Indians call him.
People don't know what this is. He's Leonard Nimoy, and he had a
Leonard
TV
Nimoy.
show
In search of.
called In Search of.
Right.
And also, I thought maybe you were going to say this, but there was a movie called The Legend of Boggy Creek.
Yes.
And that commercial scared the bejesus out of me. And I didn't really even know it was like supposed to be a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot creature. I didn't know what it was, but that was compelling. But now, most of your experiences have those been in North Carolina as opposed to Georgia, or both?
Georgia, North Carolina, and Florida. Yes, all
Florida,
three.
yeah.
Yeah. I've had quite
Florida's
a
got
number of
quite a bit.
experiences.
I
Oh,
was
yeah.
surprised to see. Yeah, I'll bring up that map again. Let's see. Give me a moment here.
Yeah, Florida is you think about it, it's actually physically a little bit smaller than Georgia, and it's
Look at
got
that. 342 sightings.
okay, not coming up on my side, but that's right. That's from the BFRO.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
it's like number
but
3.
now, what's interesting though is you don't think of Texas. You think of Texas, but I guess North Texas is a little different, because I guess South Texas is a little more arid and dry. But most of the time, you're going to see them in mountainous or areas where it's kind of moist and kind of definitely higher humidity.
East Texas has a
Woods.
lot of the East Texas has a lot of the sightings. There's an area there called the
Oh,
Big
yeah?
Thicket, the Big Thicket area, and that is loaded. And for whatever reason, they have a larger number of encounters that seem more aggressive. It's kind of funny because it's like it's Texas. What do you expect? You know
Oh,
what I mean?
yeah, they're from Texas. What do you expect?
From Texas. That's kind of funny. And I'm sure it's just probably all kind of a weird something could gain a reputation, and then that's what they're kind of expecting or looking for. But you think about Florida, it's physically a little bit smaller than Georgia. I know if you look at them on the map, you're kind of like, yeah, it's narrow, but it's so much longer. It couldn't be smaller. But in the area, it's a little smaller.
Yeah.
And it's got twice as many people. So they are definitely bumping up against each other, especially in the Everglades. Now, my encounters were all in a radius from, I was living in St. Augustine, and I found 3 main research areas.
Okay.
There was a state park just below St. Augustine that kind of actually went along the beach. It's forest, it's pine forest, but also butted up to the beach. And then there was the 12-mile swamp, which was west of St. Augustine. And then there's a wildlife management area on the St. Johns River. That was about 35 minutes away. And I had a really, if you want, I will tell you that encounter. I say encounter.
Absolutely.
It's not even an encounter, but to me, it is one of the
Experience. Yeah.
most powerful experiences I've had.
Go ahead, share.
So I've learned how to tell this story. There's a certain way to tell the story and a certain way not to, because it has a part that I have to at least touch on that's really dark. But I used to go into too much detail about the dark part of the story, and the podcasters would be all like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." Like, it's learning the art of storytelling, right?
Right.
So I've learned. So it has to be mentioned that in 2015, I lost my twin brother, at the age of 49, and losing a family member at all is bad. But being my brother and somebody I was really close to, and the circumstances in which I lost him were just more than I could bear. And I was working down in Florida, so I had gone up to try to be with him while he was in the hospital. Then is when he died, and so I ended up extending my stay, and going through all that I had to there, and then of course the funeral and scattering his ashes out on the river. And so I had to get back to work. And the organization I work for, we typically worked 6 days a week. Sunday was the day off. Now, occasionally we could take a Saturday off, but I remember I came back on a Saturday. And so I had nothing but that Sunday off when I got back. And I thought, well, I could stay here in the apartment, just sit here with my thoughts, or I could go out into the forest, and maybe I need to get my mind off things and go out into the forest. So that's what I opted to do. And this was the one on the St. Johns River. It's got 2 names. One of them is the John C. Hall Wildlife Management area. And the reason I remember that name is because I had a friend who was working with me down there named John Hall. But the other is named after one of those big Florida figures. And I'm not going to think of it right now. Doesn't matter. It's about a 7,000 or 9,000 acre property. Not huge, but plenty big for whatever you want to find in there. And I'd already found on previous journeys up there intriguing stuff, nothing earth shattering, but some interesting tree breaks and structures. And so on this time I went and I drove up into the little parking area. This is in a spot where you may get an occasional bicyclist might come through and stop, but it's kind of off the path to just be for people anywhere. It's like it's far enough away from the city that you're not just going to walk to it. You can't do that. Sure, there's some houses scattered here and there. The reason I bring it up is I never saw more than 1 car, 2 cars at the most whenever I pull in there. And usually those cars had a horse trailer on the back of them because this is a big place for people to go horseback riding.
All right.
So this particular day, there were no other cars. And this is the reason I bring this up. There were no other cars in the parking lot. And I was using what's like one of the state worker dirt roads that they use to access the interior.
Right. Yeah.
They get those state vehicles going in. So I had a degree of openness about it. I wasn't like I was in a walking trail in the woods. To my left, I got in there and then I started headed back the way I came, but on foot, headed back towards the St. Johns River. There was an area I would go to. So I'm walking down this dirt road. And so going back east towards the river, the forest was probably 20 yards or more off the road. They also had a lot of fire areas cut out to prevent fires from spreading. What do you call those when they cut the, say they dig it out? They dig these big areas so the fire can't jump.
Right.
So anyway, I go down this road and I immediately just start going into my grief. but I'm trying to manage it. And I'm aware of something in the woods, some kind of sound, like the sound of the thicket being moved by, it could be anything, a deer, something. I'm trying to kind of like peek in from my distance and see if I see anything, and I don't see anything. But I keep continually hearing a little something, or at least I did for a bit. And then my grief started to overtake me, and I just had to let it. It's like, okay, this is what the day is ruling. What's going on? I'm not in charge here.
Right.
And so I just started bawling and crying and just boohooing, and I'm walking and I'm crying and I'm just letting it out. And that may have gone on for like a full 5 minutes or something. And then I start slowly coming out of it. And I continue walking, and in a pretty short amount of time, I get to the river's edge. And there's a downed cypress tree right there. And I sit on the tree, and there's still a lot of tree cover, a lot of cypress trees, and the moss overhanging the river. It's really beautiful. So I'm on the tree just looking out the river and seeing the boats go by and looking at the bridge that crosses the river. And I thought to myself, it's not a day for trying to commune with the forest people. I'm gonna get back on the trail and start walking back. And around the time I got to probably nearby where I had had my breakdown, I looked down, and there's a yellow flower about that big around. I say yellow, white petaled flower with a yellow center, kind of like a daisy, but I don't think it was a daisy. It had a stem, and I forget that substance, what it's called. But like when you pluck a weed or something, when I was a kid, I would literally play with it.
Oh yeah,
Looks like Elmer's glue coming out of the, and I don't think that's the same as the chlorophyll, which is a clear liquid. This is a white
I know what you're
liquid,
talking about. This is a white liquid. Yeah.
and it gets sticky like glue.
Yes, it
The
does.
thing still had the white stuff on the edge of where the stem had been broken.
Right.
And I looked around, and I did not see any of these flowers growing anywhere, certainly not where it was placed on the path. And I had no choice but at this point to use the word placed, because there was no broken stem growing. It's not like I had kicked something on the way there and there's the broken stem. And I look around, and I just became overwhelmed again, but overwhelmed with, it wasn't exactly a grief. It was more of this feeling of, I mean, this is when you're getting into the woo. Like,
Yeah.
I had this feeling, it was an unmistakable feeling that I was being observed. And when I went into that moment of grief, whatever it was observing me saw me in my grief.
Yes.
And I mean, there's going to be a lot of people that hear this that will immediately go, all right, he's out of here, cut him a check. That's what I'd work for these painter companies, and they'd be like,
Oh yeah.
when somebody's like not working the way that, got him a check.
Yeah.
But that's fine. This is what I experienced. And I literally held the flower up, and I said, thank you to the woods. I never saw a thing, and I walked out. Now you think I would have kept track of that flower and put it in a book or something, but I don't know. But when I got back out of the parking lot, there were no cars there. So still, as far as I can tell, nobody had been in the park. And if they had, you'd have to piece together this thing where they plucked the flower and they ran and put it on the path somewhere near where I happened to have my meltdown for whatever reason. Sometimes, like if you remember the UFO debunker, Philip Klass, to me, his attempts to debunk things were more ludicrous than accepting the possibility that there are things. It may not be people from outer space, but there's something going on. It's not all swamp gas, Philip Klass.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because you're familiar with the Bledsoe family with the UFOs, Chris Bledsoe.
That wasn't the
sons?
I don't know. That wasn't the Hopkinsville thing, was it?
I'm not sure where they're located, but he describes, he's an older gentleman, he's got his sons. He talks about, he goes through the initial sighting, right? But then he talks about, because it's not far from where he lives.
Okay.
He talks about he was, and I can't remember if he lost someone in his family. There was a reason why he was very, very sad. He
Okay.
walked into the woods and he could sense that they were watching. He thought it was the aliens, and that they
Okay.
could sense that he was upset. So like there's when you say it's woo, there's just this thing that's kind of beyond. There are experiences that are things that you just can't explain
Yeah.
rationally or
Yeah.
scientifically, but they do happen. And
Yeah.
I really brought that up. It sounds kind of the same thing where you have
Yeah.
experience where, and it's not with another human being, it's with something else.
Something else.
But it seems to be that they have some compassion.
There and honestly, that you just hit the nail on the head. I mean, I'm using the word woo, but this really doesn't even have to involve anything paranormal. It would just have to involve something that is able to observe me and feel compassion and express some kind of empathy for me, or at least sympathy. Um, so that doesn't even really have to involve anything like ESP or telekinesis, which I personally now, once again, I'll steer clear from using the word believe, but I am working my way towards being convinced that these beings, I don't like using the word things anymore. I'm sure at some point I've probably said these animals or these things. If you want to say animals, we're animals.
Yeah.
These beings, I believe, have those kind of abilities. I'm not saying they all do. They could be like, we're the opposite. We don't have much of that ability, but occasionally somebody does. Like I've had in my life 2 prophetic dreams. Now, I didn't try to have a prophetic dream. It was a
Right.
dream. It happened. And then within a short time, I didn't even know it was prophetic at the time. It was just a dream. And then within a really short time frame, I found out, oh, this is happening. The dream happened and now this is happening. So we still have some of that ability, but it's kind of the opposite. There's only a few people who see.
We've lost it. We've lost it as human beings.
Yeah.
Now, and I believe this was we can talk about Les Stroud a little bit, but
Yeah.
I think he said he had a experience where he was alone in a tent, and then he threw telepathy. Someone or something was calling him to go out of the tent and
That was
go
Tennessee.
beyond. That was Tennessee.
He went to go hang out with Scott Carpenter, who, Scott Carpenter, man, just, and, RIP Scott. I think it's been 2.5 years or something now. That guy was an amazing researcher in Tennessee. And he's the one that pioneered putting a GoPro strapped on his shoulder, looking backwards while also filming forwards. And a lot of the amazing stuff he captured was, all right, to give you an example, there was this really bad rash of tiger attacks in the jungles of India. These certain workers that would have travel in single file down these paths through the jungle. I don't know what their work was, but it took them through the forest. And there was a lot of attacks. And who was getting attacked? The person at the back of the line. They were the ones getting taken. So they started putting these masks on that showed a face on the back.
Yeah, yeah.
The attacks went down dramatically, almost to nothing. So even these things, as brilliant as they might be, it appears as though maybe they weren't aware all the time that something was still looking at them.
Still looking at them, yeah.
He's got some incredible stuff. So I digress a little bit to show that Les Stroud went to go visit with him, and there was a night where I believe he deviated from Scott and said, I'm going to go camp out by myself tonight.
Right.
And these beings communicated to him telepathically, we're just on the other side of the hill.
Right.
If you want to get a look at us right now, you have an open invitation. And he said, I'm just not ready. Yeah. Any of you people who know who this man is, he is
he's the survivor man. And yeah, you're right. And his series, I would recommend you look at it. But the way he analyzes things, especially his Bigfoot series, the tree breaks, the structures, and he talks about, well, was this a snowfall or was this something else? He kind of really breaks it down. He's very compelling. But yeah, I wonder just about that part, the communication.
Yeah.
We talked about the verbal stuff, but the communication
Yes.
telepathically, that's compelling.
And I haven't experienced anything that direct, or at least now, depending on what I've been on some podcasts where I describe certain things that have happened, and they said, well, communication doesn't have to be with language, verbal language, even though we say it's not verbal because that literally is this, but the use of words, because when we're hearing it, we're apparently hearing the word in our head. But I have not had that voice in the head. Now, I've had my own voice. We all have that voice in our head, right? So the when that time I told you when I heard my first tree knot when it was down in that ravine. So that was in 2014, up in North Georgia, off of Highway 52, and I had rented a cabin, and Stacy and I and our dog Douglas, and I was all excited because this was going to be my first. It was actually my second time. I went up with a couple of mine, a friend, a husband and wife, and we went up to near Helen, Georgia in 2013. And we found a couple of really, really compelling things then. So that the very next year I got back out with Stacy and so that first morning I got up really early. I let her sleep in. I took Douglas out for a walk, and I was going back up the cabin's off the dirt road, and then I just started going back up the dirt road the way that we came in to see what I could see. I definitely was having to walk the dog, but I also had the intention of getting a lay of things here. And I rounded a little switchback and started going further up, and I clearly had this voice in my head, but when I say a voice, it wasn't some external thought.
Right.
It was me telling myself, look down now. And I looked down, and there's a triangle. Now, the thing about it, well, you could argue, oh, the stick fell this way, and this fell, and this fell, and it made a triangle. But the thing is, this triangle was made out of not 3, not 2, but 1 stick. Each break was not complete, and it was fashioned in a triangle.
Right. Right.
1 break was complete, and then the other 2 breaks were still tethered, so that you broke and you broke, and then the other 2 you just put. And I knew, once again, sort of like with the flower, and this was my first. This was my first gift, and I'll tell you what I interpret that triangle as meaning. I interpret it as meaning, we know you're here, we know you're here looking for us, and we are here, and here's a little gift for you. I had other things occur on that trip, and that was like the introduction to it. One of them was the tree knock. One of them was something coming up that ravine in large numbers, and some food I had thrown over the ravine the night before.
Right.
That was actually a hair-raising experience for me because whatever it was, I'm very familiar with raccoons and
Sure.
and possums, and I'm familiar with their mode of locomotion when they're traveling over the leaves.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I'm familiar with the sound it makes when they're on crunchy leaves. This was something you could tell it was way heavier, but also very fleet of foot, and it was moving in like and it stopped. Right. And it would be more than one doing that in unison. And then stop. And it kept doing that till it literally got right up under the porch I was on overlooked this ravine. Like I could look down at the drop.
Right.
And I'll be honest, I was scared. And I could have got a flashlight. I guarantee if I got a flashlight, I wouldn't see anything anyway. But I was
probably not.
No. I was too scared to get a flashlight, but something was coming up from the creek, which went down about 100 yards or more, and a pretty steep climb. Like I could never climb up that. Like maybe a Navy SEAL could go up something that steep that fast. I don't know. But it was also just such a bizarre mode of locomotion, this quick scurry and then an intentional stop. Quick scurry, intentional stop. I told you about the tree structure above the path later. That was also. I got foot tracks. I've got foot tracks that I videoed that I believe are a lot of juveniles playing around in the mud. They're humanoid footprints, but I don't think they're people. Yeah, they weren't shoes.
Well, since you brought that up, I would be remiss if we didn't talk about Dr. Jeff Meldrum.
Human and primate locomotion. It's the footprint evidence that drew me in. And likewise, many of my scientific predecessors, Dr. Grover Krantz, Dr. John Napier, it was likewise the composite data set of the footprints that compelled them to take this matter seriously.
So you can remind me, because I did spend some time looking at Dr. Meldrum's stuff. Remind me again what he calls the break between.
It's called the mid-tarsal break, and you can see
mid-tarsal. That's it.
You can see evidence of it in that picture right there. Now, some people will confuse that. Then I can understand that with longitudinal arch that we have, but it's not that at all.
No.
So when you the best way is go to the beach if you can, or a sandy area, walk. And if you're my right foot is almost completely flat, but I've got an arch in my left foot. And it's that classic, if you're on that hard, I don't mean like soft sand, you're on that hard packed wet sand. So you just make a light impression and you see this big empty area where there's just no impression, period. You've got the ball of the foot, the toes, a little bit of the edge of the outer portion of the foot, and then the heel. And that middle section is just not there because of the arch. What the mid-tarsal break literally is you've got a flat foot. And just like with your toes, you have joints in your toes and fingers. There is a joint in the middle of this foot.
It's the joint.
And it allows the foot to break there and fold. And as it does, especially if it's gaining purchase uphill, it's going to push a pressure ridge, but only going to do it on a flat. It's going to push up a pressure ridge in the middle. Well established, and he's the one who has done such an amazing.
He's done a lot of work. Yeah, it's very compelling. He goes through all that. He talks about arch, and then he talks about this metacarp. What is it again? Sorry, metacarpal.
The mid-tarsal break.
Mid-tarsal break, yeah. And I mean, you can tell that. Well, even from the Patterson Gimlin, you can tell the way the foot pushes off. It's just not that. Yes. That looks more like explains that break because of the way the foot moves, and that helps them. That probably helps them how quickly they move when they have to, because when we run, we don't get. I mean, the only traction we get is like with our toes, and this thing allows it to dig even more, or whatever it needs to do, like climb out of a ridge or whatever it's doing,
or wrap over a rock. Our feet are so fixed and rigid; they are so awkward for rough terrain. They really are.
Right.
This is tailor made for any kind of terrain. Lloyd Pye is a person who pointed out just how bad our feet are. But go on.
Oh no, I saw recently. I don't know what country this is. But they were studying tribes that are barefoot all the time, and their toes start spreading out, just like primate. Now they don't develop that ridge, but their feet change.
Yes, shoes have totally kept so. Obviously, our footprints, the toe. Now, I've seen some Squatch prints, quite a few, where they're fairly uniform. But like I said, more often than not, you're going to see some splaying, which actually even aids more in that locomotion and gaining purchase of your environment.
And climbing things.
Climbing, exactly. So here's the thing, too, that I got to point out. Just like with hoaxed video and photographic evidence, or even hoaxed vocalizations, some of which I have certainly had access to, it's usually it's a no-brainer. It's easy to spot. So the classic person wearing strapped on wooden cutouts of feet.
Right.
That has occurred. But first of all, there's two major points. One of them is, yes, it's a fixed thing. So it doesn't look, you can tell by the print, it doesn't even look natural. But beyond that is also, you're a maximum of 250-pound person, maybe, right, these things. The impression they make, and they have a way of gauging that. So there were some foot tracks found somewhere out west on a mountaintop in very hard substrate. but it was still an impression in there. And they were, first of all, not only, of course, impressed by the size of the tracks, but how they even made an impression in all. So they went back down the mountain. They made a rough, similar-sized foot track. On the top of that foot track, they put a little stand, like a leg, and then they put an area. So they had to make this so that it could deal with this. They had a big cargo area up top to put sandbags on. They made this thing super reinforced. With the leg had all kind of reinforcements, and so that it was also balanced. It took some doing to make. They put that on the ground in the same area where the foot track was, and they started putting sandbags on it. Sandbags.
Right.
If I remember correctly, and I don't remember the length of the foot track. I don't know if it was 12, 13, 14 inches. That's hard. It was something over 800 pounds. So even if you're putting on, some guy hoaxed people one time in Florida. He put on these he made these fake giant penguin feet. It's hilarious. And he started walking on the beach, some beach in Florida. And you did have these absurd looking giant. And so they were all like in some kind of like giant penguin monster. But you can imagine if the foot was this big and they were huge, the body that would be on top of those feet. Now, obviously, the wider the foot, the more weight distribution you're getting. So it's not going to go in as far. But that would be supporting an animal that was probably 2,500 pounds at least. So you're going to have, this was the teeniest little impression in the sand. People just forget about that. All these things that you're calling hoax tracks. I found a track up along a creek, 7 miles northwest of Helen, Georgia. Now, that track did not have toes, but the area where the toes would be were pieces of sticks and stuff like that. But the back side of it, there was no shoe heel. There was no tread. It was some type, in my view, a bare foot. And it measured against my shoe. I didn't have a ruler, but when I have running shoes on, it's about even 12 inches. Mm-hmm. This thing was a little longer than that. Now, here's the thing. When you hear people, oh, that's nothing. I got a size 13 shoe. I've studied shoe size for men. So what happens is you've got the 12-inch mark. So when you're below 12 inches, and let's say you've got a size 7 shoe, you're teeny, that doesn't mean a 7-inch foot. That's actually more like an 8.5-inch foot.
Right.
And once you get above 12 inches, it goes the other direction. A size 13 doesn't mean a 13-inch foot. It's probably about 12 and a quarter. And the further up, like when you talk about a human with a size 16 shoe, which is massive, that might be a 13.5-inch print. On average, adult footprints that they find, they average 16 prints. The largest I know of that are credible are 25 inches. So you just can't, like, the whole thing of like, and then once again, Jeff Meldrum has foot casts that have dermal ridges in them, the equivalent of fingerprints. And as you said with him, we would be remiss if we didn't bring up Jimmy Chilcutt, who is a fingerprint specialist. His job on primate fingerprints, including humans, and mostly focused on humans, but he did study chimpanzees and things quite a bit. His judgment put people in jail or not, depending on what he found out when it came to criminal cases. This guy is an expert.
Right.
And he said, these are absolute. Nobody sat here and carved tiny little dermal ridges. And the fascinating thing about it is when you look at the dermal ridges on the bottom of their feet, they're different from the ridges on a human's foot, and they're different on the ridges on a chimpanzee's foot. They kind of run counter. So I'm gonna be honest here. I can't remember if it's the chimp's foot where the ridges run at length with the foot or crossways. But one of them, it's either us or the chimp. One of them runs crossways, one of them runs the length. Theirs runs exactly in between the two at like an angle. He's got those on foot casts. One of those foot casts came from Elkins Creek, Georgia, in an amazing story that occurred in the 1990s.
Now, what area would that be in Georgia?
Oh, about an hour and a half south of Atlanta, over in West Georgia. not too far from Columbus, Georgia.
Okay.
So getting close to Alabama line, that story is amazing, and it's honestly kind of hair-raising if you want to take 5 minutes for it.
Sure. Go ahead.
Okay, so I don't know these counties over there where Elkins Creek is, but these are rural counties, so there's usually one officer is generally 1 to 2, usually 1 per county to deal with county calls, whether it's a domestic issue or a problem with an animal.
Sure.
So there was a particular man who had some property, in a trailer, a mobile home, who was known as this very cantankerous old man, and he was known pretty well by the local police force and others for just being this classic kind of gritty old man that always was complaining. Right. But he started these call-ins about something on his property. And of course the police, eventually they sent somebody out. They came around to the property and they had to drive in down a windy road and they got their spotlight. It's nighttime. And he's telling them what's going on. And they're not taking him that seriously. They're thinking he's making something out of nothing. This keeps happening more and more. He's like, they're banging on the side of my mobile home. He showed an impression in the mobile home and where a rock had hit it and literally put an indentation like that deep into the metal because it's one of those old metal-sided homes.
Right.
And something was breaking into his barn and taking his 50-pound bags of dog food and like clearing them out. And the creepiest thing. So eventually what they're thinking is there's drug dealers somewhere on the property, meth dealers that are wanting to run him off the property. That's what their little hypothesis is. They're wanting to run him out of there. He claims they had a little dog. I don't remember if it was a Chihuahua, but it was a little dog named Peanut. And he would take Peanut out to do his business. And then he'd go, Peanut, come on back. Well, whatever this thing was that was banging on their cabin would go up to the cabin wall and go, Peanut, like that. The first time I heard that, it's like the hair just, because that's not all that uncommon to have them not only mimic humans, but sometimes to do it in their voice, a very low register. So they were getting to where he was actually scared. So at some point he called him again. I don't know how many calls occurred over like a several months, maybe 6-month period. And the sheriff was kind of determined that something was going on. He just couldn't put his finger on what. So he goes out there and I think he found some of the dog food bags in the woods, totally void of dog food, just ripped open and gone. Well, he goes back, I don't remember how far behind the house, and he's walking along the creek. And in the creek and leading up to it, he finds these 18-inch foot tracks.
Wow.
And he is like, holy moly. He goes back to the car. He's got casting materials in the trunk. He comes back, and I think he got 3 or 4. Eventually, they went underwater. But the most amazing thing he said is on the other side of the creek. So the one side of the creek is just the dirt goes up real shallowly to the water. The water just comes up gradually. On the other side, it was a major raise up. Whatever it was that walked across that creek took its leg, kind of like I described that footage of that thing in Canada, and took its leg and just climbed up with there's no sign of like hands or arms grabbing the side. Just took its foot up. So anyway, years passed. He had these casts, and years later he got to talking with some sheriff, and the guy was talking about these sightings and foot casts in Oregon and Washington, and he was really interested in the subject. The guy goes, foot cast? He goes, hang on, I got you covered. And he went back to his closet and he dug up these foot casts, and he just put in the closet. He didn't know what to do with them. Well, that foot cast went its way to Jeff Meldrum. He's got it. And it's one of the foot casts with the dermal ridges. And it's an 18-inch print. And if there's any similarity between the size of their feet relative to the size of their height, and I don't know that is something that's commensurate with our ratios because our other ratios are off. But if it's even remotely
Some of these.
similar, look up Elkins Creek, Elkins, or if you don't, he's got it. I'll tell you if I see it. It's a great foot track.
Yeah.
Anyway, you're talking about probably a 9 foot tall specimen. Specimen. That sounds terrible. None of those are ringing about. Oh, it's really similar to these really nice looking ones. See, do you see the one that had the club foot, the wounded foot?
Oh, the cripple foot.
The cripple, that foot cast has been found hundreds of miles apart, the exact same footprint, and cast more than once.
Right.
Tell me that's a hoax. Somebody is traveling. Maybe I've exaggerated. I know it's miles, like probably well over 60. I say hundreds because that's just the nature of me is to kind of ramp things up. But it was way away from where the other foot track was found, and it's identical. So you got somebody that's hoaxing from miles apart on two different, and also by years. It was years and years later when the second foot cast was made. I think I'll go back up this many miles away and use that same hoax foot cast.
That doesn't seem, and the fact that they, it would be difficult to make it that way.
Well, that's the thing.
That's a natural footprint, whatever it is.
Right, like when you brought up the breast. Like, come on, wounds. There's plenty of foot tracks that have evidence of scarring, of tears that have never healed up properly. I mean, face it, it's a rugged life, right? If they're and then a club foot or a foot that's broken and healed back. I think that's actually what it was Grover Krantz determined
that's what they think,
that it was broken and it healed back improperly. I mean, you're going to have that from time to time, of course. And who's going to think to hoax a foot that broke and then healed back improperly? Who would do that? Somebody will come out and say, "Oh, I guarantee you I'd do it," And I'm not saying, I'll tell people, don't believe me. Don't believe Jeff Meldrum. Don't believe David in his opinions. If you're interested, before you start putting all this down, get out in the woods yourself, because that's what I decided to do. And I have had some pretty crazy stuff. Now, no, I've never had a Sasquatch come up and shake my hand, but I know people that I trust implicitly that have had direct sightings, close up, have had so many sightings of eye shine where literally the eye shine is not because of a flashlight. That's crazy. We're talking bioluminescence.
Right.
We're talking eyes that are emitting light. And not only that, the light changing, the eye color changing colors, even going from a greenish color like a deer to red. In one instance up in North Georgia, it was a group of people intentionally going up there to go hit an area where they kind of have an interaction with them. And they were seeing the eye shine across the creek from where they were hanging out. And some new guy that had joined forces with them to go hang out and see the Sasquatch or try to get a glimpse of them made some real snide remark. Just made some nasty remark through the night air. And according to my friend, I won't name her. I'll call her G for her first name. She probably wouldn't mind me naming her, but I don't do that to anybody if I didn't have their permission. They saw the eye shine go from green to red right after he did that. Like, so is it like expressing anger? Like, okay, you're overstepping yourself, dude. Back it down, Not that bad came as a result. So yeah.
Before we wrap it up, would you like to touch on Dr. Melba Ketchum real quick as far as forensic evidence?
I will, sure. And I'll start off by saying, I do not understand DNA.
Right.
Oh, go ahead. Play that first. Part
of the study. I had no idea that I would find anything novel at all. I really believed that they would be I would disprove it instead. But it all changed when I had some samples come in that were a little bit different. I piqued my curiosity when the community found out we would test the samples.
How many of them do you think are out there?
Oh, there's thousands. Literally.
Thousands of Sasquatches.
There's many
in Kentucky, right?
No. This is all over North America and Canada.
Okay.
In fact, there.
So, yeah, I think she's got some compelling information.
Okay.
I know a lot of people will say that the samples have been tampered with, and she goes through a long, I don't have the recording of it, but the long process of how they have gone out of their way through independent labs, chain of custody.
Three
everything.
labs.
Yeah.
Yep, three
And-
separate labs.
And then people say, well, she purchased her own medical journal.
She did, and there's a reason for that.
Exactly. I know why, because none of the other ones would take her stuff.
They wouldn't.
But go ahead
they wouldn't.
and talk about it. Yeah.
Well, I was starting off by saying I do not understand DNA science. Okay, so obviously I don't come. It would be silly for me to even read over the data, because that would be like reading
Sure.
any like a journal on rocketry. I'd be like, okay, so, but what I do know is that according repeatedly, like I've never caught her liars. Usually, as they say, a liar has to have a good memory. She has repeatedly stated the exact same thing. There 3 independent labs were given samples ranging, there were, I believe, 111 samples, and they range from hair to tissue like flesh and blood, and saliva, I believe. And of course, they were not told what they were analyzing. And in all 3 of these labs came up with the same thing, that the mitochondrial reads as human, but the nuclear DNA reads as an unrecognized species. So reading that what you may, a lot of people, of course, say, well, it's because it's been compromised. Well, first of all, there are methods to clean up the evidence that any DNA has the researcher has.
She explained.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, in case there is. So there's that. Now, she doesn't help her cause out any, because she talks about it. This is coming from somebody who's very open to the woo. But she does talk about this. See, this is where a case study.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff Meldrum versus Ketchum. Meldrum has stuck to one specific thing. He doesn't even like to talk about tree structures. He's had researchers he's gone out with.
Right.
He's looked at all that stuff. He doesn't dismiss it, but he doesn't really. He stays focused. His focus.
He stays his lane.
And you can see what that's going to. People would say, well, that's narrow-minded. You've got to start really branching out. You're never going to understand anything more. It's like, yes, but he serves a very important role here. And because he's not, she talks about all the wooest of the woo. And it's immediately, for whether it's right or wrong, it's going to bring down a crap storm on her head, on her credibility level. I think there's some to it. Of course, from what I understand, this is not the only DNA study that has been done. It's the most popularized one. But yes, Michael Cremo, who has challenged the whole idea of the theory of evolution. I think he argues that microevolution is clearly been proven, that a species will make certain adaptations physically to its environment to adjust to changes in the availability of food or the temperatures or whatever, but that there's no clear fossil record yet to determine that one species completely becomes another. Now, I'm not here to make a judgment on that. I'm telling you that's what he says. And he says that when you're dealing with trying to get approved by the collegiate scientific community, there's a knowledge filter. They've already determined what they're going to look at and accept. And if it doesn't pass through the knowledge filter, there's stuff that they won't accept. You're not going to get the time of day. You're not going to get the approval, the peer review. You're not going to get it. She could not get the peer review, so she bought a publication. And I don't blame her. Because she knows there are going to be some people who are willing to then read the study, who know about it, and they can determine.
Right. She encourages people to look at the data and analyze it themselves and do all that. The other thing that she does talk about, which is, and I don't remember all the details, but basically she talked about the maternal part of the chromosomes and the paternal. And she said that
mitochondria,
the ones that I think it's maternal, they showed that it was human, and she thinks that like a female human mated with a Neanderthal.
That's what the
That's what
inference
she's-
is.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
that's what the inference is that the female side of the DNA seems to be the human side, and the missing info, the mystery creature that's behind the other half is whatever it was. Like I said, may have been another. The thing, if it were Neanderthal, I guess Neanderthals are still considered a proto-human, though, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
maybe the DNA wouldn't come back human at all. I guess I don't see. That's where my limitations. I think Cro-Magnon would come back possibly as human, or partially human.
Well, there's all sorts of hominids that have been discovered since that kind of really challenge a lot of the original evolution of primates and human beings. And
one of the things they've recently just come across is that they now believe that was considered a more sophisticated humanoid or hominid was Cro-Magnon. They believe they were often raped and pillaged and brutalized and utilized as food by Neanderthal. There's a lot of evidence of that. That's frightening to think about,
Well,
but certainly possible, So yeah, who knows? But I think so that's the thing. Instead of just this one single file thing of evolutionary changes, more of like they know
Right.
they don't really call it the food change. They call it the food net. But also in terms of like species, they're branching out everywhere. Some of those branches die off. Some of them might be right under our noses, and I think this is one of them that probably is. And if they are there, I said it earlier, they're going to be extremely interested in what we're up to. And I do also have some degree of, I use the term loosely, of evidence that they get in a lot closer to cities than people would ever. If they have a tough time believing in them or accepting it, and I said, don't believe, go out and get the evidence yourself.
Mm-hmm.
They have a tough time with that. I had a tough time with this getting in close to the city thing because I had befriended somebody who lived in Washington, but wasn't going in the deep forest of Washington State, was going in a kind of forested park that was surrounded by neighborhoods and finding compelling stuff. And I still couldn't get my head around it. I'm like, wait a minute, there's no entry point, though. Without him having to go through a neighborhood, him, her, whatever, there's no entry point. How is this possible? Well, I haven't decided how that's possible, but the very things he was showing, I have now found in a park, including some footprints, but also broken trees that defy explanation readily, and what's described as a boneyard in a park that's literally 2 miles from where I'm sitting right now. I can be there in 5 minutes in a car. Elliot and I go to that park. It's got a pond. It's got ducks. It's got people fishing in there. It's also got a forest. And I'm not going to say 100%, but I'm going to tell you there's some mysterious stuff going on in those woods. And when we get all, at some point we have another phone chat, I'll give you some more detail on that and send you some pictures. All these are things
sounds great.
Should have been more prepared for, but I
that's all right. Well, we are approaching 2 hours, which is fantastic.
Wow.
I guess we'll wrap it up right now. But Philip, thank you so much. Your knowledge and your stories and your experiences, I think, are just amazing. And thank you for being on the podcast. I would love to have another one at another time. But thank you again. This has been Philip Polk Palmer talking about Sasquatch. This is Shall We Consider. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.
Bye-bye, y'all.
Hello, folks. Philip and his friend Jim Reed need your help. Please consider supporting the Marshes to Mountains Project, a Western North Carolina hurricane relief benefit compilation. Those good people still need our assistance. Thank you.